Nice watch, Steve. Is that the new model? Yeah, birthday gift from my wife. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was simply delivering the lunch my husband had forgotten at home, the third time this week. As I approached the partially open conference room door at Lambert Financial Services, where Steve worked as a systems security analyst, I paused when I heard my name mentioned. What I heard next would shatter the foundation of everything I believed about my marriage. Does she know about the tracker you installed on her car? A voice I recognized as belonging to Cameron, Steve's colleague, asked. Or that you forward her text messages to your email. The casual tone made my blood run cold, but it was my husband's laughter that truly froze me in place. Are you kidding? Vanessa has no idea. She thinks I'm just the perfect concerned husband. The lunch bag in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. My fingers tightened around the brown paper until it crinkled audibly, though not loud enough to alert the men inside. I forced myself to back away quietly, my heart hammering so violently I was certain everyone in the office could hear it. My name is Vanessa Chen, 32 years old, and until that moment, I believed I was in a loving, trusting marriage with Steve Harmon. We'd been together for 5 years, married for 3 of those, and while no relationship is perfect, I had thought ours was built on mutual respect and honesty. In the space of a few seconds, those beliefs crumbled like sandcastles against the tide. As I walked through the sleek lobby of the office building, past the security desk where I had cheerfully signed in just minutes before, I felt like I was moving underwater. Everything seemed distorted, distant. The security guard nodded at me as I passed, but I barely registered his presence. Outside, the spring sunshine felt like a mockery. It was one of those perfect May afternoons in Chicago that made you believe anything was possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Discovering your marriage is a surveillance operation on a beautiful day somehow makes it worse. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd heard. It wasn't just the surveillance that horrified me. It was the casual way Steve had laughed about deceiving me, as if monitoring my movements and reading my private communications was some kind of joke between friends. Something to brag about, something to be proud of. The signs had been there all along, hadn't they? I simply hadn't wanted to see them. The way Steve always seemed to know where I'd been before I told him. How he sometimes referenced conversations I'd had with friends that I never told him about. His uncanny ability to appear coincidentally when I was out with colleagues for after-work drinks or lunch meetings. I'd brushed it all off as him being attentive, even a little psychic. I had joked to my friends about how Steve and I were so connected that he could practically read my mind. Now, I realized with sickening clarity that I'd been living with someone who didn't trust me, or worse, someone who wanted to control every aspect of my life. My first instinct was to drive back into the parking garage, march into that conference room, and confront Steve in front of his colleagues, to demand explanations and apologies, to make a scene that would force him to face what he'd done. But something stopped me, an inner voice of caution that I would later be grateful for. If Steve had been monitoring me so extensively without my knowledge, what else might he be capable of? And if I confronted him now, unprepared, what would be the consequences? Would he delete evidence? Turn things around on me somehow? I needed time to think, to formulate a plan. I started the car with trembling hands and pulled out of the parking space. As I drove, I found myself checking the rearview mirror obsessively. Was Steve tracking my movements right now? Could he see where I was going? For the first time, I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Instead of returning to my office at Wilson Accounting, where I worked as a senior financial analyst, I called my supervisor and told her I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a lie. The nausea churning in my stomach was very real. Linda, who had always been understanding, told me to take care of myself and that the Bergman client presentation could wait until tomorrow. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head. Eventually, I found myself at Lakefront Park, a quiet spot where Steve and I had often walked on weekend mornings. The familiar setting only heightened my sense of disorientation. How many times had we strolled along the shoreline, talking about our future, while he was secretly monitoring my every move? Sitting on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan, I forced myself to think logically. I needed to understand the extent of Steve's surveillance before deciding what to do next. That meant investigating without alerting him to my discovery. The thought of returning home and pretending everything was normal made my skin crawl, but I knew it was necessary. at least for now. By the time I pulled into our driveway that evening, I had composed myself enough to maintain a facade. Our house, a modest but comfortable three-bedroom in Lincoln Park that we purchased 2 years ago, no longer felt like a home. As I stepped through the front door, I wondered how many cameras might be watching me at that very moment. "Hey, you're home late," Steve called from the kitchen. The sound of his voice, once comforting, now stranger than a stranger's, made my shoulders tense. I was starting to get worried. "Of course you were," I thought bitterly. "Your tracking device probably showed I wasn't at the office or on my usual route home." "Just a busy day," I replied, hanging my coat in the hall closet with forced casualness. "The Birdman presentation is tomorrow, and we're still finalizing some numbers." He appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. At 34, Steve was still as handsome as when we'd met, tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly when it grew too long, and gray-blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The familiar smile he offered me now made my stomach turn. "I'm making that pasta you like," he said. "Should be ready in about 20 minutes. "Sounds great," I managed. "I'll just go freshen up." In the bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. Could there be cameras in here too? I felt paranoid even thinking it. But after what I'd heard today, anything seemed possible. I turned on the shower to mask any sounds and thoroughly examined the bathroom, the light fixtures, the air vent, even behind the mirror, but found nothing suspicious. When I emerged, Steve was setting the table, a bottle of wine already open and breathing. It was surreal going through the motions of our normal evening routine while my mind raced with questions and plans. "How was your day?" I asked, pouring myself a larger glass of wine than usual. "Pretty standard," he replied, bringing the pasta to the table. "Had a meeting with the new security client. Cameron thinks we've got it in the bag." Cameron, the man who knew about Steve tracking me. I wondered how many other people at his office were aware of his surveillance activities. How many people had he bragged to about spying on his wife? "That's great," I said, taking a long sip of wine. "You've been working hard on that proposal. What about you? Linda's still pushing for those projections." I nodded, careful to keep my expression neutral. "Always, but we're in good shape for tomorrow." Throughout dinner, I maintained the illusion of normalcy, asking about his work, sharing sanitized details about my day, laughing at his jokes. All the while, I was acutely aware that I was performing for an audience, not just Steve, but potentially for whatever recording devices might be capturing our interaction. After dinner, Steve suggested watching a movie, but I claimed exhaustion from the workday. In our bedroom, I went through my nightly routine mechanically while my mind continued to race. As I lay beside him in the dark, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep, I stared at the ceiling and made a silent promise to myself. I would discover the full extent of his deception, and I would find a way out. Sleep eluded me that night, but by morning, I had a plan. Chapter 2: The Investigation. The next day passed in a blur of professional obligations. Somehow, I managed to deliver the Bergman presentation convincingly, though I felt like I was operating on autopilot. My colleagues noticed nothing amiss, attributing my slightly distracted demeanor to pre-presentation nerves. I waited until Friday to take my first real step. When Steve mentioned his weekly golf game with clients, a standing appointment that typically kept him out of the house for most of the day, I saw my opportunity. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I began a systematic search of our home. I started in his home office, the room where Steve spent most of his evenings. The large mahogany desk that dominated the space had been a point of contention when we bought it. I'd argued it was too big for the room, but Steve had insisted on having multiple drawers for organization. Now, I wondered what those drawers might contain. Most held the expected contents: office supplies, files related to our mortgage and insurance, user manuals for various electronics. But in the bottom right drawer, beneath a stack of old technology magazines, I found a small black notebook. The plain cover gave no indication of its contents, but when I opened it, my suspicions were confirmed. Inside, in Steve's neat handwriting, were lists of passwords, not just his own, but mine as well. Email accounts, social media, banking, even my work VPN login. Beside each entry were dates, presumably when he had last updated or verified the information. The most recent update was just 2 weeks ago. The notebook also contained what appeared to be a log of sorts, dates and times with brief notes. April 12. Lunch with JR at Stella's, 1:15 to 45. April 17. Stayed late at office, then Meridian Hotel, 7:30 11:10. April 23. Call with Diane, 22 minutes. Discussing weekend plans. With shaking hands, I continued searching. In a locked drawer, the key hidden predictably on top of the doorframe, I found more disturbing evidence. A small box containing various electronic devices I didn't recognize. One looked like a keylogger, designed to capture keystrokes from a computer. Another appeared to be a tiny camera, no larger than a button. At the bottom of the box was a USB drive labeled simply V. I connected the drive to my personal laptop, not the computer Steve had given me for my birthday last year, which I now realized was probably loaded with spyware. The drive contained dozens of folders, each labeled with dates going back nearly 2 years. Inside were audio recordings, screenshots of my text messages and emails, and logs from what I now recognized must be the tracking device on my car. But the most chilling discovery was a folder labeled Contingency Plan. It contained drafted legal documents for divorce proceedings, with highlighted sections outlining grounds for an at-fault divorce due to infidelity. There were also notes about potential financial settlements that would leave me with virtually nothing. Scenarios where Steve would retain the house, the majority of our savings, and even try to claim a portion of my 401 acre. I sat back in Steve's office chair, overwhelmed by the evidence of his betrayal. This wasn't just casual snooping or insecurity. This was methodical, calculated surveillance with a clear endgame. Steve was building a case against me, manufacturing evidence of affairs that had never happened, preparing to blindside me with a divorce that would leave me financially devastated. The irony was that I had been nothing but faithful. The suspicious meetings with Gerard were lunches with my colleague James Rodriguez, with whom I was collaborating on the Bergman project. The Meridian Hotel was adjacent to our client's office and housed the conference rooms we rented for late-night sessions. And Diane was my cousin, with whom I'd been planning a surprise birthday party for my mother. I copied the contents of the USB drive to a secure cloud storage account I created using a library computer later that day. I also photographed pages from the notebook and the contents of the locked drawer. If Steve was building a case against me, I would build one of my own, one based on truth rather than paranoid fiction. But I knew physical evidence wouldn't be enough. I needed to access Steve's digital world to fully understand the extent of his surveillance. That night, after we'd gone to bed, I waited until his breathing indicated deep sleep before carefully getting up. I retrieved his smartwatch from the nightstand, where it always charged, and took it to the guest bathroom, the furthest room from our bedroom. The watch was locked, of course, but thanks to the password notebook, I knew the 4-digit code. Once unlocked, I navigated through various apps until I found one I didn't recognize, a messaging platform with a nondescript icon. The conversation history showed exchanges with someone named Alex, whom I'd never heard Steve mention. The messages confirmed my worst fears. Alex, V working late again tonight. Her office or hotel? Steve, hotel. Same guy as last time. Car tracker shows her there 3 hours min. Alex, getting evidence. Steve, plenty. When divorce happens, she'll get nothing. I scrolled through more exchanges, my heart pounding. The messages dated back months, with Alex seemingly acting as some kind of advisor or confidant in Steve's surveillance operation. They discussed my movements, speculated about my relationships with male colleagues, and strategized about how to collect evidence that would hold up in divorce proceedings. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and waited for Steve to leave for his office. Once alone, I used his computer passwords to access his email accounts, cloud storage, and other digital spaces. What I found exceeded even my darkest suspicions. Steve had installed spyware on my phone and personal laptop, giving him access to my calls, texts, emails, and even my camera and microphone. He had set up cameras in our living room, kitchen, and home office, disguised as smoke detectors and air fresheners. He had been recording my phone conversations and storing them, along with screenshots of my private messages, in a meticulously organized digital archive. Most disturbing of all, I discovered he had created a fake email account in my name, which he had used to send flirtatious messages to a non-existent man. It appeared to be groundwork for fabricating evidence of an emotional affair. Messages I had supposedly deleted, but that he had recovered. The depth of his deception was staggering. This wasn't just paranoia or insecurity. This was calculated psychological warfare. And the most painful realization was that it had been going on for years, possibly since the beginning of our marriage. The man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been systematically violating my privacy and plotting my downfall. I knew I needed help, not just emotional support, but strategic guidance. Using a work phone that Steve wouldn't have access to, I called the one person I knew I could trust implicitly. "Melissa," I said when my sister answered, "I need your help. Can you meet me for coffee? And don't call or text my personal phone." My sister, ever perceptive, didn't ask questions over the phone. "Perkins Cafe in an hour," she suggested, naming a place far from both my home and office. "Perfect," I agreed. "And Mel, this is serious. I'll be there if she promised." I arrived early, choosing a table in the back corner where we could speak privately. When Melissa walked in, her expression shifted from concern to alarmed as she took in my appearance. I hadn't slept properly in days, and the stress had taken its toll. "Van, what's going on?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "You look terrible." "Steve has been spying on me," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Not just casually checking my phone or something. Full surveillance, tracking devices, cameras in our house, monitoring all my communications." Melissa's expression changed from concern to horror as I laid out everything I had discovered over the past few days. When I showed her some of the evidence I had gathered on my secure tablet, she sat back, visibly shaken. "This isn't just controlling, Van," she said finally. "This is abusive. You need to get out of there." "I know," I admitted quietly, "but I need to be careful. He's been documenting everything, building this false narrative about me having affairs. If I leave without preparing, he could try to destroy me financially." Melissa, who had gone through a difficult divorce herself 5 years earlier, nodded grimly. "You need a lawyer, not just any lawyer, someone who specializes in cases like this." "Do you know anyone?" "Actually, I do," she said. "When Maya went through that nightmare with her ex who was stalking her, she worked with an attorney who specializes in cases involving digital abuse and surveillance. Let me call her." By the end of our meeting, I had an appointment with Diana Winters, the attorney Melissa recommended, for the following afternoon. I also had the beginnings of a plan, one that would require me to maintain a perfect facade at home while methodically preparing for my escape. "You can stay with me," Melissa offered, "whenever you're ready to leave." "I might take you up on that," I said, "but not yet. I need to gather more evidence and secure my finances first." "Just be careful," my sister warned, "if he realizes you know." She didn't need to finish the thought. We both understood the potential danger. Men who control through surveillance often escalate to other forms of control when their systems are threatened. "I will," I promised. "I've been an analyst for 10 years now. If there's one thing I know how to do, it's maintain a poker face while running the numbers." As I drove back toward home, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The initial shock and betrayal were still there, but they were now accompanied by something else, a cold, clear determination. Steve had violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible. He had turned our marriage into an elaborate trap, designed to eventually spring closed and destroy me. I would not allow that to happen. Chapter 3: Building My Case. Diana Winter's office was located in a converted Victorian house in one of Chicago's older neighborhoods. The exterior, with its gingerbread trim and welcoming porch, belied the serious nature of the work conducted inside. As I was shown into her office, I noted the sound-dampening panels on the walls and the white noise machine humming discreetly by the door, a space designed for sensitive conversations. Diana herself was not what I had expected. Based on Melissa's description of a tough-as-nails attorney who specialized in digital abuse cases, I had imagined someone older, perhaps stern. Instead, I was greeted by a woman around my own age, with a warm smile that somehow didn't diminish the sharp intelligence in her eyes. "Vanessa," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Melissa briefed me a bit on your situation. Why don't you tell me what's going on, and we'll figure out how to help you." Over the next hour, I detailed everything I had discovered about Steve's surveillance activities. Diana listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. Unfortunately, this isn't my first case like this, she said. Digital surveillance by intimate partners is becoming increasingly common. The technology is readily available, relatively inexpensive, and most people don't realize how vulnerable their devices and personal information really are. So what do we do? I asked. First, we document everything, Diana said decisively. The evidence you've already gathered is excellent, but we need more. We need to establish a clear pattern of illegal surveillance and emotional abuse. She outlined a strategy that involved carefully collecting and preserving evidence of Steve's activities without alerting him to my awareness. This meant continuing to use my compromised devices as normal while simultaneously documenting the surveillance through secure channels. Don't use any new devices at home, she cautioned. If you suddenly start using a new phone or laptop, it might tip him off. Keep using your regular devices for mundane activities, but assume everything is being monitored. I've been doing that, I assured her. I'm only using secure devices outside the house. Good, Diana nodded approvingly. Next, we need to secure your finances. Does Steve have access to your bank accounts? We have joint accounts for household expenses, but I've maintained my own separate accounts as well. He has online access to view my personal accounts, though. He set that up early in our marriage, claiming it would be easier for tax purposes. Diana frowned. We'll need to address that. I recommend opening new accounts at a different bank entirely, gradually moving funds into those accounts in amounts that won't immediately raise red flags. We spent the next hour developing a comprehensive exit strategy. Diana explained the legal implications of various actions, both Steve's and my own, and outlined how we would approach the divorce proceedings when the time came. What about the cameras in my house? I asked. Is it legal for him to record me without my knowledge? Absolutely not, Diana said firmly. In Illinois, we have a two-party consent law for audio recordings. He's committing a felony by recording your conversations without your consent. The video surveillance in common areas of your home exists in a grayer legal area, but combined with the audio recordings and his clear intent to use the surveillance against you, we have a strong case. By the end of our consultation, I felt more grounded than I had in days. Having a clear legal strategy and professional support made an enormous difference in my outlook. This wasn't just about escaping a controlling husband anymore. It was about holding him accountable for his actions. One more thing, Diana said as our meeting concluded. I recommend you consult with a digital security specialist. I can refer you to someone trustworthy who can help ensure your new devices and accounts remain secure. The specialist, a former cybersecurity expert named Raphael, met me at Diana's office later that week. He provided invaluable guidance on securing my communications and detecting surveillance tools. He also helped me understand the technical aspects of the evidence I had gathered, which would strengthen our legal case. Based on what you've shown me, Raphael said after reviewing the files I had copied from Steve's computer, your husband is using commercial-grade spyware that's technically illegal to use without consent. The GPS tracker on your car is relatively sophisticated. It reports real-time location data and stores movement history in the cloud. Can it be removed without him knowing? I asked. Raphael shook his head. Not easily. These systems typically send alerts if they're tampered with or if the battery runs low. For now, I recommend leaving it in place while we document its existence and use. Once you're ready to make your move, we can deal with all the surveillance tools simultaneously. Armed with technical knowledge and legal advice, I returned to my careful double life. At home, I maintained the role of unsuspecting wife, going about my normal routines while knowing that Steve was monitoring my every move. At work, I began preparations for financial independence, updating my resume and discreetly exploring opportunities that might offer more security and flexibility during the tumultuous period ahead. I also started sessions with Dr. Elaine Mercer, a therapist who specialized in helping survivors of domestic abuse and coercive control. Initially, I had resisted Melissa's suggestion to seek therapy. I didn't consider myself a victim of domestic abuse in the traditional sense. There had never been physical violence in our relationship. Coercive control doesn't always involve physical abuse. Dr. Mercer explained during our first session. What your husband is doing, the surveillance, the isolation, the preparation to deprive you of financial resources, These are all tactics of control and abuse. Through our weekly sessions, I began to recognize patterns in my relationship with Steve that had paved the way for his current behavior. The subtle isolation from friends who didn't respect our marriage, the gradual assumption of control over household decisions, the small criticisms that had chipped away at my confidence over time. It's like the analogy of the frog in slowly heating water, Dr. Mercer said. If these controlling behaviors had all appeared at once, early in your relationship, you would have recognized the danger and left. But because they emerged gradually, you adjusted to each new normal without realizing how far things had shifted from a healthy baseline. These insights were painful but necessary. They helped me understand that what was happening wasn't my fault, and they strengthened my resolve to reclaim my autonomy. Over the next 3 weeks, I methodically built my case. Each day, I documented new evidence of Steve's surveillance. I secured my financial future by opening accounts at a new bank and redirecting a portion of my direct deposits. I researched apartments in neighborhoods far from our current home, and I continued to maintain a perfectly normal facade at home. The strain of this double life was immense. Each morning as I left for work, each evening as I returned home, I had to remind myself to act naturally despite knowing that cameras were watching and recording devices were capturing my every word. I found myself scrutinizing my own behavior constantly, worried that the slightest deviation from my normal patterns might alert Steve to my awareness. The only respite came during my late work nights, times when I told Steve I needed to stay at the office to complete important projects. Instead, I would meet with Diana, Raphael, Dr. Mercer, or sometimes simply sit in a cafe with my sister, momentarily free from the weight of performance. How much longer? Melissa asked during one such evening, noticing the dark circles under my eyes that makeup couldn't fully conceal. Soon, I promised. Diana says we have almost everything we need. We're just waiting for the financial transfers to complete and for Raphael to finish his analysis of the surveillance data. I'm worried about you, my sister admitted, the toll this is taking. I know, I said, running a hand through my hair. But I need to do this right. I only get one chance to leave safely. My carefully constructed plan nearly collapsed 2 days later when Steve asked to use my laptop while his was being updated with company security software. I'd been careful to keep my browser history clean and had deleted any files related to my escape plan, but the request still sent a jolt of panic through me. Sure, I said, striving for a casual tone as I handed over the device. Just don't judge my disorganized bookmarks. As he settled on the couch with my laptop, I busied myself in the kitchen, trying to appear normal while my heart raced. Had I missed anything? Was there some digital breadcrumb that would reveal my investigations? After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, Steve returned the laptop with a smile. Thanks, babe. All done. I searched his face for any sign of suspicion, but found none. Either I had been sufficiently careful, or he was a better actor than I gave him credit for. Either way, the incident reinforced the urgency of my situation. I needed to accelerate my timeline. The following day, I met with Diana for what we both hoped would be our final planning session before implementation. We have everything we need, she confirmed, reviewing the evidence we had compiled. The documentation of his surveillance is comprehensive. The financial preparations are in place. The only question now is timing. We settled on the following Friday, just over a week away. Steve had a monthly team dinner that typically kept him out until late evening, which would give me time to execute the first phase of our plan. Diana would file the divorce papers first thing Monday morning, accompanied by requests for restraining orders based on the evidence of illegal surveillance. Remember, Diana cautioned, the most dangerous time in situations like yours is when you leave. Once Steve realizes he's lost control, there's no predicting how he'll react. I understand, I said. I'll be staying with Melissa, and we've arranged for security measures at her building. As the day of my departure approached, I found myself experiencing a strange mix of emotions. Fear and anxiety, certainly, but also a growing sense of anticipation, not just for freedom from surveillance, but for the opportunity to reclaim my life on my own terms. The night before my planned departure, Steve and I had dinner at home as usual. He seemed relaxed, even affectionate, reaching across the table to take my hand at one point. We should plan a vacation, he suggested. Maybe that trip to Barcelona we've been talking about? I could use some time away from work, and you've been putting in so many hours lately. The irony of his concern about my work hours, the very thing he had been using as supposed evidence of infidelity, was almost too much to bear. I managed a smile and a non-committal response about checking our schedules, all while thinking that by this time tomorrow, our marriage would effectively be over. As we prepared for bed that night, I took one last look around our bedroom, the space we had shared for 3 years, where I had once felt safe and loved. Now, knowing that even my most private moments here had likely been monitored and recorded, the room felt alien and hostile. Tomorrow, I promised myself as I slipped under the covers beside the stranger who was my husband. Tomorrow, I reclaim my life. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. Friday arrived with a sense of inevitability. I went through my morning routine with mechanical precision, trying to suppress the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm me. Steve left for work with his usual kiss and a reminder about his team dinner that evening. "Don't wait up," he said. "These things usually run late." "Have fun," I replied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. If all went according to plan, I would be gone by the time he returned. At work, I struggled to focus on my tasks. My colleagues, noticing my distraction, attributed it to the upcoming weekend. If only they knew that by Monday, my life would be unrecognizable. At 3:30, I messaged my supervisor that I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave early. Linda, as understanding as ever, wished me a restful weekend. As I walked out of the office, I felt a momentary pang. I had no intention of returning. My resignation letter, carefully drafted and dated for Monday, was saved in my secure email drafts. The drive home was surreal. Each familiar landmark seemed to mark not just physical distance, but the psychological journey I had undertaken over the past month. By the time I pulled into our driveway, a strange calm had settled over me. The time for doubt and fear had passed. Now there was only execution. Inside, the house was quiet and unchanged. The same photos on the walls, the same furniture, the same subtle surveillance devices hidden in plain sight. I moved immediately to my home office and retrieved the go bag I had prepared the previous weekend while Steve was at a golf tournament. Essential documents, a few cherished possessions, enough clothing to get by until I could return with police escort to retrieve the rest of my belongings. I placed the bag by the front door, then returned to the living room to wait. Diana had advised that confronting Steve in person was risky, but I had insisted. I needed him to know that I had discovered his deception not through luck or carelessness on his part, but because I was smarter and more resourceful than he had given me credit for. At 5:45, my phone rang. It was Steve. "Hey," he said, the background noise suggesting he was already at the restaurant with his team. "Just checking in. How was your day?" "Interesting," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Actually, I need to talk to you about something important." "When will you be home?" There was a slight pause. "Not until late. Is everything okay?" "No," I said simply. "Everything is not okay, Steve. I know about the surveillance. I know about the tracker on my car, the spyware on my devices, the cameras in our house. I know about your messages with Alex about fabricating evidence for a divorce." The silence that followed was absolute. I could picture him moving away from his colleagues, seeking privacy for this unexpected confrontation. "Vanessa," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "I don't know what you're talking about. Are you feeling all right?" "Drop the act," I said, anger finally bleeding into my tone. "I have evidence of everything, copies of your files, screenshots of your messages, documentation of all the surveillance devices. I've consulted a lawyer, and we're filing for divorce on Monday." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The concerned husband persona replaced by something colder, more calculating. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You don't understand what's happening." "I understand perfectly," I countered. "You've been spying on me for years, building a false narrative about affairs that never happened, planning to blindside me with a divorce that would leave me with nothing. The only mistake was trusting you in the first place." "Don't do anything hasty," Steve said, an edge of urgency now creeping into his tone. "I'm coming home now. We need to talk about this in person." "No," I said firmly. "By the time you get here, I'll be gone. I'm leaving Steve. The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning, along with requests for restraining orders based on your illegal surveillance." You can't prove anything, he said, abandoning the pretense completely now. It's your word against mine. Actually, I can prove everything. Your careful documentation works against you, Steve. All those recordings, all those logs, they're evidence of criminal behavior. Electronic surveillance without consent is a felony in Illinois. I could hear his breathing change, becoming more rapid. Where are you going? He demanded. That's not your concern anymore, I replied. My lawyer will contact you on Monday. Don't try to find me or contact me before then. This isn't over, Vanessa, Steve said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You have no idea what you're doing. Goodbye, Steve, I said, and ended the call. My hands were shaking as I set down the phone. The confrontation had gone much as Diana had predicted. Initial denial, followed by attempts to manipulate me into waiting for an in-person conversation, culminating in veiled threats when those tactics failed. But knowing the probable pattern hadn't made it any less unsettling to experience. I had just finished gathering my bag when I heard a car door slam outside. A glance through the front window confirmed my worst fear. Steve had returned home far earlier than expected. Either he had left immediately after my call, or he had never been at the team dinner at all.